Hello, and welcome to my professional communication skills masterclass today about all things behavioral styles and DISC to allow you to be a more effective communicator. And we've got lots of people registered, which is fantastic. Lots of people from Australia, which is home, but also lots of international people jumping on today as well, which is fantastic. So we have a jam-packed session, an hour masterclass for you. Not just about understanding behavioral styles, but more importantly, how to use your understanding of behavioral styles. Let me share my screen and we'll get straight into it. So the reason I've chosen this topic today, because I see lots of people who have the right gear and no idea, in the sense that they wear it as a badge of honor that they know about behavioral styles. Maybe they can understand their own behavioral style. Maybe they've done an assessment on that. Maybe they can tell you what behavioral style characteristics are for each of those behavioral styles, but then they're not using them in real life. They're not ishing, we call it. They're not adapting their behavioral style to match the person in front of them to be a more effective communicator and to have greater value with their communication. And as you know, knowing something and not doing it gets the same results as not knowing it in the first place. So listen, I've seen this over the years work really well, and I've seen it where people do have the right gear, there's some knowledge about it, but they have no idea about how to use it. The no idea part I see regularly in sales, communication, but also in interviewing. Through my career, I've been able to interview lots and lots of people for different roles, and still with my clients, sometimes get asked to be in the interview process. And of course, when they're interviewing for a business development or a sales role, then often in an interview, they'll tell me about, that one of their strengths is their ability to communicate. And one of their strengths is knowing behavioral styles and how to adapt their behavioral style. And I listen to them and I ask them questions about it. And quite often I've got some really good knowledge about it. And then I notice their communication throughout the interview. And often, and sometime, later in the interview, I might say, oh, listen, you mentioned that you were really confident with understanding behavioral styles and adapting your behavioral style to match the person in front of you. And I say, so what have you done in this interview to match my behavioral style? Not that they should match my behavioral style because I'm anyone special, but if I'm interviewing and I have a responsibility for potentially recruiting them and choosing them to join the team, then they should be matching my behavioral style. And you see the eyes light up and the deer in the headlights scenario, and they realize that they're talking the talk without walking the walk. And there's too much of that going on. So today is about implementation. We'll do a bit of understanding for those that are new to behavioral styles and DISC about what does it all mean. But most important today, it's implementation. And then I've seen it work really well many, many times. In fact, I first came across seeing behavioral styles and DISC used in real life in 2002. So what's that, 20 years ago? Some of you weren't even born. And I was working in the fitness industry at the time, and I've been in a single owner-operator studio and club for 6 years. I had an opportunity to move into a national chain of clubs. And so through the interview process, so it was a sales and business development role. Then in the interview process, they were using this one person as an example of how successful you could be within that role in that organization. How many new memberships this person was achieving. They obviously ran through the commission structure, and they were talking about, this is how much this person is achieving. This person was the #1 sales performer in the entire country. Now, I happened to be employed when I was off the role and accepted the role at the same location. There's multiple locations all over Australia, but I was going to be at the same location as this person, which was at Modbury in South Australia. So I gave my notice to my employer, and in that notice period, I went to my new club. And just to get a feel of the place, do a bit of a workout, get to know the reception team. And as I was at receptions, meeting people and introducing myself, I noticed that there was a person in uniform, a guy in uniform doing a presentation, doing a sales presentation. And I could not miss this person because they were so loud. I could hear them. There was him and the person who was a young lady that he was presenting to. They were loud. They were laughing. They had heaps of tonality in their voice, lots of inflection. They were sitting forward. They were really engaged with each other. And you could tell the girl was really, comfortable to give lots and lots of information. So it was really fast paced, lots of hand gestures, lots of smiles and facial expressions, lots of noise going on. So I thought, well, I wonder if that's that guy. Anyway, I went in, met some of the other staff, did a workout. About an hour later, I came back out. And the same gentleman, was sitting there. But this time, he was a very different version of himself. This time, he was sitting back. He was speaking slowly. He had low tonality and monotones. He had pauses in his speech. He wasn't using a lot of hand gestures. And he was with an older lady, also doing sales process. And again, I could tell that this older lady trusted this person and was willing to share information about some challenges that she'd had and some goals that she was after. And this was Ian. And he was, as you can probably tell, at the time, the #1 salesperson in this organization nationally. And I don't think Ian would mind me saying that he's quite quirky. He's got a quite quirky personality, but his skill set was to be able to we call it, slightly adjust his behavioral style to match the person in front of him. And that allowed him to be a really valuable communicator, to have people trust and like him very quickly, but to deliver a message that the person in front of him really sees as valuable. And that's what I want your takeaway to be today. So it's not a personality trait. As soon as people talk about DISC as being personality profile, you know that they don't understand it. It is a predictable behavior. So let me share that screen again. And let's get into a bit of an understanding of behavioral styles, but most importantly, how to use them. Because if you know it but don't do it, it's going to hurt your conversion. Not just at the end when you're asking for a decision or a sale, but right through from lead to phone call to booked appointment, etc., and even through other things like recruitment and retention, which I'm going to touch on as we go through today. So what I ask you to do, and hopefully you've got a pen handy, you're writing lots of notes because it is all about implementation, is to start with the end in mind. Now that means, what do you want to get out of the next hour, next 55 minutes now? What do you want to get out of it? If you were to improve something with your communication, what would that be? Is it on the phone? Is it in the sales process face-to-face? Is it with your relationships with your work team? Is it relationships outside of work? What part do you want to improve? Because this is all about, no matter what business you're in, and we've got lots of industries on today. We've got lots of fitness industries. We've got some real estate. We've got a whole bunch of industries. And we all are in the people business. So we all know that we are in the people business. It's always people that are making the decisions about whether they're going to move forward with you or not. So we are all in the people business. So the more effective we can be at communicating with people, the more successful we're going to be. And of course, the greater relationships we're going to have outside of our employment as well. In fact, as you can see, your ability to communicate and create awesome relationships is one of the most important success strategies you can learn. In fact, if you know your own behavioral style, maybe you've done an assessment, I'll give you some tools to do that today. If you know your own behavioral style, if you can pick up the behavioral style, both primary and secondary behaviors of someone that you're communicating with, not necessarily by them doing an assessment, but just you noticing how they communicate. I'll teach you how to do that today. And then if you can adjust your communication to match theirs and ask for a decision using primary and secondary behaviors, you're in the top 3% of communicators worldwide. Now, I believe we can have a lot of positive influence by being in the top 3% of communicators worldwide. So usually we would do a DISC training, is a full day of just focusing on DISC. And with a lot of my clients, we do that every 3 to 6 months to resharpen the edges on disc. In fact, in our Sales Authority Club, just last Friday, we did a full day on disc training. So this is a quick snapshot, and it's less about training you about disc and more about helping you. Where do we implement it? Where do you use it? If you know a little bit about it. If you're brand new to it, then as I said, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey to give you some information on that right away. So we know that there's 4 different primary behavioral styles. We have the top right, the D for dominant, the yellow, the I for influencer, the green S for steady, and the C for cautious or compliant. Now, all of us have all 4 of those behavioral styles in us. We just have different levels of each of those. So some of them are more dominant than others, which affects the way that we behave. So it's a predictable behavior. Now, the interesting part, which a lot of people aren't aware of or don't use, is that we have an adapted and a natural style. So the adapted style is the adapted work style. So the adapted style is the style or the ways that we communicate in a work environment. And the natural style is the ways that we communicate in a safe environment. We call that the home environment, but sometimes home doesn't feel safe for some people. So it's where you're relaxed and comfortable. So as you can see in this example on your screen, in the adapted style, the work style, this person has a high D behavioral style with a secondary S. But in their home style or natural style, their D comes up, their S goes down, and their C comes up. Now, here is the interesting part. I'll get you to write this down if you're taking notes. Is that under stress or pressure at work, we revert to our natural behavioral style. So for this person, under stress or pressure at work, their D goes up, their S goes down, and their C goes up. Now, they might be a bit grumpy or short at work if they're under pressure. So it's not just about their adapted work style, it's about understanding, if it's your staff members and yourself, understanding those natural styles as well. So there's lots of ways that you can understand your own behavioral style. Now, normally when we teach on DISC, we do this. We get you to do an assessment right here and now, but in an hour masterclass, that's not the case. But I will give you opportunities to, at the end of this session, for me to send you some information about how you can get access to doing your own report. Some of you would know your own behavioral styles, primary and secondary, but even today, I'm going to give you some examples of each of those behavioral styles. So even if you don't know your own behavioral style or you haven't done the assessment, you'll get a good understanding of where you fit in. So this is a manual way that a lot of our clients use in recruitment, but also with their members and clients. You can, of course, also, we've just created an electronic version of that, which is really easy. Don't have to do any numbers, it adds it up for you. And of course, you can do the full report like I showed you before. But the real skill set is noticing someone's communication and be able to pick up what you believe is their primary and secondary behavioral style just through the way that they communicate. Certainly for staff and people you're working with, doing an assessment is great. And if you're the type of business that has regular clientele that see you weekly, then yes, of course, like a studio or a club, then understanding your client's behavioral style is important as well. But if you're a business that you might see a client once or twice a year, then you need to be able to pick up on their behavioral style just by communicating with them, listening to them. And that's the skill set that I want you to take away today. So this is the little framework that I want you to have in your mind every time you meet someone to assess their behavioral style. Because we're going to use this framework with the D and the I on the right and the S and the C on the left to determine behavioral styles. So the D for dominant, I'll give you a quick snapshot of each of these behavioral styles now, and then we'll do a deep dive in a second. So the D for dominant, the ones on the right, the D and the I, as you can see, they talk pretty fast. And they're more likely to tell than ask. So they talk faster than the average. And they've got a fairly blunt tonality. The D, although they talk fast, is more task-focused than people-focused. So the D would prefer to quickly get a job done, get it done, achieved, be the fastest to do it. And if that has a negative effect on people, also be it. where the I is the reverse of that, in the sense they're more people-focused than task-focused. So they'd rather be around people, have everyone happy, have a good environment. And if that slows down the achievement of the task, well, to them, that's okay. So here we're talking primary behavioural styles. On the other side, the C's and the S, they tend to talk slower than the average. They have a more monotone approach to their communication, like I'm doing now, and they tend to be slower and have more pauses in their communication. The S's are more people focused, and they love being in groups. They want everyone to be successful together. They want to feel safe. They want to be part of a community. And the C for cautious is the real detailed person. They love a plan and a structure, and they ask very detailed questions. They love proof. They love reports. They love, as I said, systems and structure. So let's go and say, at the moment, you're starting to get a bit of a feel, if you don't know your own behavioural styles, of what they might be from a primary perspective, and also people around you, what they might be as well. Now, interestingly, from the population, often in business development and sales, we think that there's a lot of D's out there. Every time we do a presentation, oh, that was a D, that was a D. No. Only 18% of the population have a primary behavioural style as a D, 29% as an I, 45% is the most common as an S behavioural style, a steady behavioural style, and 8% C for cautious. So let me give you a little bit of a tip here. We often think that there's a lot of D's out there in a business development or a sales process. Now, the reason for that is that when people come into your environment or you're doing a presentation with them, they may feel, okay, someone's going to ask me to buy, and they come in a bit on the defensive. So even subconsciously, they think, I might be a bit stronger in the way that I communicate to make sure I don't get taken advantage of. And sometimes that looks like or feels like to you that they're a D behavioural style. But the reality is, you can only, for those that don't understand DISC, which is most of your clientele, you can only maintain a behavioural style that's not yours for about 2 minutes. So if they come in sort of abrupt, you think, oh, this person is pretty D-ish. And if you can maintain that for about 2 minutes, then you'll find that they'll revert to their natural behavioural style. And that allows you, and as you could see, there's a small percentage of the population, only 18% are true Ds. So that allows you then to be able to slow down and take your time with it from there. So don't be fall into the mistake of thinking that all these people are Ds and I'm just going to rush the presentation and get to the point really quickly. So let's do a bit more of a deep dive on each of these behavioural styles. So the D for dominant, we're just talking about primary behavioural styles for now. D for dominant. So as I said, the D talks fairly fast. They're to the point. They've got a fairly blunt tonality. They are firm and assertive, as you can see, comprehensive, productive. They love to get things done. They just move quickly through things and to get it done and get it achieved. They want to win. They're driven. They want to do things quickly. They want to be the best at it. They love a challenge. And they're really determined. They are very competitive. You want to inspire a D to take action, whether it's a client or a team member, then set some competition around that. They are very confident and very decisive. Now, sometimes they can change decisions really quickly. A lot of leaders, a D leader, yesterday they came in and said to the team, listen, this is how we're going to do it. Come on, let's go. Let's all get behind it. And today they come in and said, listen, don't worry about what I said yesterday. This is the way we're going to go. Let's get on it. So they are decisive, but they can change their decisions pretty quickly. They do have, the high Ds, a bit of dismissive noise, like, yep. When they're listening, if they think you're waffling too much. So listen out for that. You'll notice that the high Ds, the dominant behavioural styles, don't wear a watch. And often that's because they don't want to be controlled by anything else. They're in control of themselves, right? So that's the D for dominant. There are some facial cues that you'll be able to pick up on with each of those behavioural styles. And with the D for dominant, often the D for dominant has horizontal lines just above the nose, not big horizontal lines, but horizontal lines just above the nose. And you might be able to pick the D for dominant in that way. Now, by the way, just a bit of a heads up, something I'd love you to do for a bit of homework after this session is to just start to listen out to communication. So whether it's a podcast or TV, or you're watching the footy on the weekend, and you're listening, or you're watching people being interviewed, or you're on YouTube, or you're out at the cafe or paying for your petrol, I want you to notice communication. I want you to pick up on some of these things and start to determine what people's behavioral style is. Let's go I for influencers. The I for influencers, also talk pretty fast, but they have greater tonality. They have big smiles on their dials. They have inflection in their communication. The I for influencer loves to be around people. They love to be the center of attention. Sometimes they wear clothing and colors that ensures that people are looking at them. As you can see, they're invigorating, they're optimistic, they're really generally positive people, see the best in people, and people want to be around them. They're magnetic, animated, often lots of hand gestures, noises, facial expressions, and often really friendly because they love to be around people. They are very trusting, sometimes overly trusting the high I's, and sometimes get let down, and sometimes quite emotional. So the high I's sometimes can be really happy, and then 2 minutes later, they're crying in the corner, and then another minute later, they're back to being happy again. So the high I's often have that high emotion to them as well. They do smile easy. So when they meet someone for the first time, they'll have a big smile on their dial, or if they haven't seen someone for a while, they'll make some noises, and they're probably huggers, the high I's and big smiles. From a facial expression perspective, the high I's often have the bigger horizontal lines on their forehead, and often smile lines on either side of their lips and either side of their eyes for the high I. Let's keep moving to the S for steady. Now, the S for steady, as you know, are the slower talking, more monotoned, more gaps in their communication. They're not the ones that want to be center stage. They're not the ones that want to win ahead of everyone else. They're the ones that want to be together in a group. They're the ones that want to fit in. And the S for steady is, as you know, 45% of the population. So it's the majority. There's 4 primary behaviors. So the S for steady is the majority. So as you can see, they are very supportive. They're reliable. They're unlikely to let you down. They are agreeable in the sense that when you're talking to an S, they'll often nod along to show that they're listening. Are very loyal, often stay in roles and with organizations for long periods of time. Sometimes they're considered easygoing, but they can be as strong with their opinion as anyone else. It just takes them a little bit longer to share that opinion. They're really good listeners. The I loves to talk, the S loves to listen. They tend to have good coffee chats because the I is happy doing all the talking, the S is happy doing all the listening and just nodding along. A great pickup for a high S is a very smooth forehead, so very few lines on the forehead of an S for steady. Let's go C for cautious. C for cautious, as you know, are the real detailed people, very task focused, still speak fairly slowly compared to the average, but very detailed. They are diligent, but sometimes perfectionist. They love a structure. They love a system. They love reports. They love analysis. They love KPIs. So for them, if they're a client of yours, you've got to let them know what the plan is. You've got to know what the structure is. You've got to let them know when the review is going to take place. If they think that they're not involved in that, then they won't have confidence in what you're doing. As I said, they're very analytical. Logic, still make decisions emotionally, but they need lots of logical information to create that emotion to move forward. And as you can see in the picture there, from a C, the higher the C, the more likely they are to have that frown, those 2 lines above their nose for the C for cautious. So I'm running through this fairly quickly because today is more about implementation, about how to use this knowledge rather than a deep dive on the knowledge. As I said, usually it's a whole day training on DISC, as we did in our Sales Authority Club last Friday, and as I do with my clients on a regular basis. So how do we pick up and identify what the behavioral styles are? So as I said, I want you to have this little graph in your head when you meet someone for the first time. And the first thing you're going to determine is, am I going to go left or right? So you're listening to the way someone is communicating, and you're listening to their tonality and their speed of speech. Their tonality and their speed of speech. If they're talking fast, they've got a fairly blunt tone, you're going to go right-hand side. Okay, I think they're a D or an I primary behavioral style. If they're a little bit slower with their speaking, maybe they're asking more detailed questions or talking about the group and security and safety, go, okay, they're going to be on the left-hand side, which is a C or an S behavioral style. So that's the first way. Write that down. That's the first way you determine someone's behavioral style without them doing an assessment, is to go left or right. Let me listen to their speed of speech and their tone. Do I think they're the right-hand side, or do I think they're the left-hand side? And then as you continue to talk to them and ask them some questions and listen to their communication, you'll start to determine whether they're more task-focused or people-focused, and then you'll be able to choose their primary behavioral style. So hello, you have a conversation with them, and you listen to their tone and speed. Are they going to be left or right? DI on the right, SC on the left. But here's a little bit of a word of warning. With those percentages of each of those primary behavioral styles in our population, 45% were S's, 29% were I's. So that means 74% of the population are below the horizontal line. So particularly on the telephone, but also face-to-face, don't rush into, if you think they're a D, just be a little bit careful. So what we add to that is left or right. So we have a conversation with them. We're listening out to the tone and the speed of speech. And then we determine left or right. But then, again, I'll get you to write this down. If you don't know, stay low. If you don't know, stay low, which means, okay, I think they're on the right-hand side. I think they're D-ish, but let me just be I-ish for a little bit until I'm sure. Because if you're going to make a mistake, it's better to make a mistake below the line, because 74% of the population are that primary behavioral style. Now, just as a heads up, we do train the P questions, they're called. So when you think you understand what a primary behavioral style is, there's some questions that you can ask to confirm their primary behavioral style. Take the guesswork out of it and confirm their primary behavioral styles. They're the P questions. Not for today, but I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And if you're wanting some help with that, of course, let us know. So how do you work with these primary behavioral styles? And again, it's all about implementation. So how do you work with them, whether they're a member of your team, whether they're clients of yours, whether they're prospects of yours? Let's run through and make sure we're clear on that. So the D for dominant. We know that a lot of things fast. They love a challenge. They love to be competitive. So clearly explain the results expected. They want to know where those targets are. If you're going to negotiate commitment, don't do it in a group because they'll get defensive. Make sure you do it one-on-one. They really need to understand the rules quite clearly. Otherwise, they'll just make their own rules. Of course, any disagreements we're going to do face-to-face, not in a group. But to get the best out of them, whether they're a client or a team member of yours, make sure there's some challenging assignments. If it's too easy, they'll get bored. They need to keep challenging themselves to be the best that they can be, maybe challenged against other people in the team, but let's make sure it doesn't get too competitive. If they're part of your team, they also need to know about their career advancement and the career path. Otherwise, they'll chop and change industries and employers regularly as well. With the I for influence, again, whether they're part of your team or a client or a potential client, we've got to have some realistic goals. Sometimes they're so positive that they can set unrealistic goals. So let's make sure the I's we're setting those realistic goals. Work on their time management because they're easily distracted. So we need to keep them focused at some point. And we can't just rush into helping them. If we're having a meeting with them, if they're a client of yours, we can't just rush in and get to the point like a D would like. We've got to develop a friendship. We've got to ask them about them. We've got to keep it social. And we've got to set those clear objectives and tasks to make sure they're not setting ridiculously audacious goals. The S for steady. Now we know the S for steady talks a little bit slower. They like safety, they like security, they like to be around other people. They like to make sure that the team is happy and comfortable. So again, whether they're a client or a team member of yours, we've got to let them know what other people have done. You've got to share your own story. An S won't share a lot about themselves until you've shared something about yourself. So you've got to get to know them, got to get to know their needs. Again, don't rush into too many tasks and targets. You got to encourage their contribution. Ask them to be involved after you've shared some information yourself. Now, for these, you might need to set some stretch targets because they're going to fall more into being happy with just fitting in and getting average results, whether a client or a team member. So again, you may encourage them to do some stretch goals. And those C for cautious, the real detailed behaviors, you got to involve them in defining standards. They don't really like to be told what to do. They like to be involved in the creation of those standards and the tasks and the structure in which you're going to work together. So really clearly define those requirements and expectations. Allow them the opportunity to finish tasks, because a C would get very frustrated if they weren't able to finish something, or they were mid project and you moved on to something else, or you'd set a target or a time frame to work with them and suddenly that's changed. That would really frustrate a C. So not abrupt or sudden changes. You need to plan out when things are going to change, when assessments are going to take place, when change of structure is going to be implemented, when you're going to change the way you work together. Make sure they're fully informed. So again, just quickly to give you a bit of a dot point about yourself and people that you work with and your clients. When you ask for a decision, let's get straight to the point with the D. We don't have to give too much fluff. Be nice and direct, and you've got to show your confidence. If they feel that there's a chink in your armor, then they'll push straight through it, and that'll affect your relationship. The I for influence, a big smile, lots of happiness, lots of fun. Make sure that you're really outgoing with your presentation. Be really enthusiastic. Now, this is ishing. If that's not you naturally, that's okay, of course. But if you want to communicate value in a way that an I behavioral style wants to take in information, that's how we need to slightly adjust our communication each time. For the S for steady, 45% of the population, slow it down. Take your time. Don't rush into your presentation or what you're there to discuss. Ask a little bit about them, share a bit about yourself. Be nice and sincere, and give security. They love to know that other people have done this before and it's worked for them. They love to know that you've worked with other people and achieved similar outcomes that they're wanting. So that gives them some security. And the C for cautious, make sure there's structure there. Don't just go on a whim. You've got to plan it out. You've got to show some reporting. It's got to be analytical, and don't cut corners. You've got to take things by the book. So as we know, the Ds love that challenge. They love to move fast. They do want results, right? They want results, and they want results that are different and better than other people. So they like to set strong goals. Those I for influencers, they love to keep it fun and chatty, have lots of variety. Otherwise, they'll get bored. Make sure there's a social element, a celebration when they achieve goals is great for them. The S for steady, let's slow things down. Don't change things too often. They like a safe and secure environment, and to understand that what you're delivering for them is tried and proven. It's been done with other people successfully before. And with those C's for cautious, heaps of structure, make sure everything's tabled. They love those reports, and as I said, by the book. So I think you've got a pretty clear indication of each of those behavioral styles, even if you've never done an assessment yourself. In short, the Ds love the what, not the how. The I's love heaps of excitement. The S's, a great communication tool for the S for steady is FFF, which is feel, felt, found. Given that they like to know that other people have done it, then F, feel, felt, found. So I know how you feel. I know lots of other people have felt the same way. And what they found is positive outcome. And for the C, let's just let them know how it's going to take place and what your structure is. So as you know, we've got a short session today with the masterclass. I'm going to give you a little bit of homework if that's okay. And what I want you to do is to write out 10 disc behavior words. So for each of those behaviors, D, I, S, and C, what words would stimulate each of those primary behaviors to be excited about your communication? So as an example, D would be challenge, not for everyone, fast, the best. I would be fun, variety, celebrate, connection. S would be safe, proven, secure. This is what everyone else has done. A lot of our clients do this. And a C is showing proof and structure and system. There's some words as examples that you might use. So I'll give you 2 or 3 for each of those, I'd encourage you for a bit of homework to continue that and write down 10, maybe with your team as well, 10 words that would excite each of those behaviors. But again, most important today is about the tools that you're going to use, i.e. how are you going to implement this information? So let me take you through that. So there's lots of ways that you can understand someone else's behavioral style, your potential clients, your team members, your family members. You can do exactly what we've just done and listen to the way that they speak, their speed and tonality. Then you do left, right. If you don't know, you'll stay low for a while until you're sure of what their primary behavioral style is. You can also do the written assessment and get your teams to do a written assessment. Now, by the way, if we're talking about clients of yours, as I said, it is really beneficial, and I'll give you a success story about this in a second. It's really beneficial for you to know your entire team's primary and secondary and low behavioral style, but also for your clients and members if you're interacting with them on a regular basis. So again, for some of them, they can do a physical report like this if you're seeing them on a regular basis and your relationship is that strong. Others, as I said, you're going to just have to assess it from understanding their communication. You can, of course, use the electronic tool. I'll give you an opportunity to download that at the end there. Or you can do the full report. Now, the full report gives you a whole workbook on behavioral style and values, and it's like reading your own biography. It's quite incredible how much detail. I know some people on this webinar have done that previously. So let's talk about how you utilize, once you understand the behavioral style of someone, whether it's your client or your prospects or your team members. Let's say it's your clients or potential clients, prospects. The first thing I want you to do is to use your CRM effectively. So a lot of you have CRMs and you type in all the notes of the communication that you've had, you record their details, contact details, etc., and hopefully every time you have a conversation with them, you're uploading a CRM with what the conversation was and setting a follow-up date. What you should be doing is also writing down their primary and secondary behavior somewhere in that CRM so it's easy to see, because it affects everything. It affects the next phone call you do with them, the next meeting you do with them, the text that you send them, the proposal you send them, the invoice you send them. If they come with a complaint or a cancellation request, once you know their primary and secondary behavior, you know how to deal with that to get the best outcome. You know how to communicate back to them to get the best outcome. So first step is utilize what you already have really effectively. The next is to use it on your tools. So whether, as we've got here, an inquiry card for an incoming call or an outbound call, you'll see on the top right-hand corner, we have a little box there. And I've got lots of examples here to take you through. So you can see we can put, and you should put, primary and secondary behaviors of your potential client or your client on the tools that you use in a sales process or your communication process. So primary and secondary. Again, here's lots of examples of how some of our clients utilize that. So it's a reminder to you, all right, how do I need to show up to this person? How do I need to communicate to this person to make sure my communication has maximum value to them? Now, normally, if we don't understand behavioral styles, we would just communicate, we would sell to ourselves, we would communicate in a manner that is our way of communicating. But that means you're going to burn some people. That means you're not going to communicate as effectively as possible. So if you really want to help people, to slightly adjust your communication to match the other person is how it all works. And that means you need some reminders of what their primary and secondary behavior is. So again, here's some examples of some of our clients on different calls of that top right-hand corner having a little space there that is utilized for their primary and secondary behaviors. But just not on telephone work, on your face-to-face stuff as well. So whether it's a how can I help you, or a exercise history or needs analysis, whatever you're using for your business, it should be on there as well what their primary and secondary behavioral style is. Now, you might think, listen, I'd remember that. I'd remember what their primary behavioural style is and the secondary. But what if you're not the one that's going to call them next time? What if someone from your invoicing department is going to call them? What if someone else from the business is going to call them? They're not going to come and ask you and say, Darren, what was the behavioural style of this person? They just need to be able to look it up on the CRM or on the information that you've completed previously to know, how do I need to turn up to this person? Do I need more detail, less detail? Do I need to be happier? Do I need to get straight to the point? Do I need to have a conversation about them first, so that your message is being delivered in the best way possible? And even on any tools that you're using from a price presentation perspective, or proposals, or whatever you're doing for a price presentation, remind yourself what their behavioural style is. Top right-hand corner, primary and secondary behavioural styles. So please make sure you're utilising it. Again, some different examples of how that works. But here is the absolute key. And again, it's a mistake with people that don't really understand behavioural styles, is that, and again, I'll get you to write this down. We build rapport to the primary, and we help decision-making to the secondary behaviour of someone. We build rapport to the primary, and we help decision-making to the secondary behaviour. So just understanding the primary behaviour, DISC, of someone you're communicating to, that's great. That means you're going to communicate in a manner that they like to be communicated to. It means you're going to build rapport and have things in common, and they're going to like that communication. But if you want to then affect decision-making, then we need to bring in a secondary behaviour. So how do we know, without doing a report, what that secondary behaviour is? Well, here it is. So we know that we have conflictors. So if you have a think about that graph again, with the D and the I on the right-hand side and the S and the C on the left-hand side, then we have conflictors. So if a primary behavioural style is D, they're probably not going to be, as a secondary behaviour, their backup conflictor. So with a D, the one adjacent to that on that little graph is an S. So that's probably not going to be their secondary behavioural style. So the secondary behavioural style is probably going to be an I for influencer or a C for cautious. Same with the I on that little graph, if you can picture that. Then the one adjacent to that is the C. So that's a conflictor. So it's probably not going to be their secondary behavioural style if their I is their primary. So their secondary is going to be a D or an S. If it's an S, the conflictor is the D. So it's probably not going to be a secondary behavioural style. The secondary to an S is probably going to be an I or a C. And the C, cautious, the conflictor is the I. It's probably not going to be their secondary behavioural style. So the secondary is probably going to be a D or an S. So how do we work with that in a sales presentation? Well, at the end of that presentation, yes, we communicate the majority of it to the primary behaviour, but we need to bring in the secondary. So let's assume you've got a D primary behaviour style. Let's assume it's DI, D primary and I secondary. Well, most of your communication is going to be fast and to the point and challenge them and say, this is going to be the best for you, like an alternate choice. So it might be, hey, listen, we've got a couple of ways that suit you to get started with us. This one is for some people, but I don't think it's for you. I think this one is really for you because it's really for those that really like a challenge. So that's a D way of presenting. But then what you need to do is, when you ask for the decision, is to match it to their secondary behavior. So if they're a DI, you communicate in a D manner, but in the end, we're going to talk about something about fun and celebrating and being the center of attention. So it could be, hey, listen, there's a couple of ways that go for you. This one, some people do, but I think it's not as much as a challenge for you. I think this one is really the best way to go. It's going to really create a challenge. It's certainly not for everyone. And once you've achieved those outcomes that we help you with, we'll celebrate. Everyone will be looking at you and talking about you. So that's a DI way of closing. We bring in the secondary behavior. But what if they're a DC? If they're a DC, we still do the primary bit fast, but instead of talking about celebration, we bring in some C things like set the new target, have a strategy for the next target. So it could be, hey, listen, there's a couple of ways of working together. The best way to do it is this second way. I think there is this way, but it's not challenging enough for you. I think the real way of doing it is this second way. It's really for those that love a challenge. It's not for everyone, but I think it's for you. And once you've achieved the goals that you've never achieved before, then we'll sit down and we'll restructure and we'll set a secondary goal, and then we'll go from there. So see how both are D primary behavioral styles, but one we're connecting to their secondary I and one we're connecting to their secondary C. So I hope you're getting this, because this is what a lot of people miss. We build rapport to the primary and we get decisions or sell to the secondary. So what if they're an I? Well, it's going to be fun and jovial and variety in your presentation. But what if they're an ID? Then we need to make sure that there's a part to that at the end, which is challenging. So listen, there's two ways of going. I know you like variety, so the choice is yours. There's a couple of ways of going for you. Both are really good fun. There's this way, which a lot of people do, and that's a lot of fun. But I think this way is going to be best for you. And once you get in, you're going to meet lots of people, achieve great results, and we'll make sure that we get those results really fast for you and that you're the center of attention. So that's just an ID way of communicating in, let's say, a price presentation. What if they're an IS? The first part is the same. Listen, there's a couple of ways of moving together. It's going to be lots of fun. I know you like variety, so I'm going to give you a couple of ways to move forward. There's this way, which lots of people do. It gives you lots of fun and variety, but I think the most variety is going to come from this way. That's certainly what I think you do, but it's up to you. You get to make the decision, but most importantly, we're going to make sure you fit into our community, you meet lots of new friends, and you're really going through a process that a lot of people have achieved success with before. So you see how that's an IS way of communicating. So build rapport to the primary and then help decision-making to the secondary. So I hope you're getting this. I hope you're going, okay, I need to understand primary and secondaries. So that not only am I communicating and building a connection, but I'm communicating and helping a decision. Because as I said before, if you can be the top 3% of communicators in the world, then you're going to have a really positive influence on lots and lots of people. So as I said, it's all about implementation. So let's talk through some other ways that we can implement. It's got to be on your CRM or similar. It's got to be used on all your tools and written down so you can remind yourself what their primary and secondary is. So again, for a bit of homework, similar to what I've just done then, if you can write down a little sentence, how would you explain your final decision about becoming a client of yours to each of those behavioral styles, primary and secondary? How would you do it? How would you communicate to the primary? And then what would you bring in to the secondary behavior to make sure that you're assisting decision-making? All right, let's take some action. So how is DISC used? DISC is, and I want you to be using this, DISC is used for recruitment. So for a lot of our clients, as I said, we still help to recruit for a lot of our clients. Firstly, it's an understanding of what behavioral styles are suited to your role. So the role that you're recruiting for, what behavioral styles are suited to it? Is it more D, I, S, C? What's the secondary? And then once you decide what behavioral style is suited to the role, then that sort of language, the words that excite that behavioral style need to be in your recruitment ads. What normally happens is you have one person who does the recruitment ads, and of course, without themselves even knowing, they would always write those ads in a manner that excites them, which connects to their own primary behavioral style and sometimes secondary. But what if you're recruiting for a role? What if the HR person is doing the ads and you're looking for a driven sales professional? Well, you're not going to attract the right person. So you got to work out from a recruitment perspective, what are the characteristics of the role? What sort of behavioral style suits that most? And how do we include those words in a recruitment ad to excite that person to put their application in? And also it's balancing out the team. You might have a couple of I's in the team. Is it good to get another high I, or is there going to be too much distraction? Do I need an S or a C or a D in there instead? So that's the part of the recruitment process. The other part of the recruitment process is to use it in your interviews. So the first thing we do when we interview someone is get them to fill out one of those manual reports. So we know what their primary, secondary, and low behavioral style is. And then that changes the way that we interview them. If we think that there's a really low C, if they're a really low C, then we'd have some structured questions to ask, but then we might ask some questions about, can you tell me a bit of a time when you didn't have a lot of variety, you had to stick to task to achieve an outcome by a certain date, and how did you go with that? Can you tell me about that? So we're noticing that, oh, there's a bit of a risk there because I've got a really low C. Let me ask them a real life question about that and see how they respond. And it might reinforce that they don't have enough planning around them, or they might tell you, and you might really feel that they can adjust that in their work environment. So it not only gives you an understanding of who's going to be suited to the role and who's going to fit into your team, but also what questions do you need to ask within your interview process as far as recruitment. Of course, it's about business development. If you can have greater connections and people trust you and you're communicating with greater value, you're going to have more clients and better conversion, particularly if you can do primary and secondary. But what about customer service and customer care? Let me give you a story here about one of my clients. So one of my early clients was a gentleman named John, and he had a PT studio. It was a vision personal training studio at Rose Bay in New South Wales. Now, we've done a bit of work with John and his team on business development and conversion, and he was increasing the new members that he had, new clients that he had in. But what he noticed is that retention wasn't great. So there was some cancellations going through. Now, he was a personalized training studio. So, his clients worked with his staff 2, 3, 4 times a week. So he had done reports on all of his staff and all of his clients. And he went through and did a review. And he found that the clients that were staying long-term had a similar behavioral style to the trainers. So they were getting on great, they stayed long-term. And the ones that were dropping out had a conflictor or a different behavioral style to the trainer. And it was obvious. So he could have done one of two things. He could have said, all right, whenever a new client comes through, I'm going to match them with the behavioral style of one of my trainers that is similar. But that wouldn't be very equitable, would it? People are going to miss out. So what we did is we trained all of his team on DISC behavioral styles, a full day. And from there, they were able to adjust the way that they communicated to their clients. They were able to adjust the way that they delivered their programming to their clients and created experiences for their clients. It's called ishing. And suddenly, the next year, out of a network of over 60 studios in Australia and New Zealand, he was the #1 in his network for retention, just by that one change of implementing behavioral styles, not just knowing about it, but actually using it. So he was able to increase leads and conversion and new clients through the training we've done previously. And then he was able to increase experiences and retention. And of course, business goes great when you've got high numbers of new clients and you're retaining them as well. So that's how it works. I encourage you guys to do something similar. And certainly if you want help with that, we can do so. So where else do we use it? And where else should you be using it? In your marketing. Again, the marketing is similar to what I said from a recruitment perspective. Most businesses have a marketing person or someone that does the marketing. Now, whenever they do the marketing, the words they're going to use in their marketing campaigns will generally match their own behavioral style, because that's what they see as most valuable in the marketing process. But that's not right, because we want to get out there and we want to attract as many people as possible. So some of them, your marketing ads, should be D-driven, fast, to the point, about challenges, about being the best. Some of them need to be I marketing, about having fun and enjoying yourself and having lots of variety. Some need to be S, about being part of our community and us helping you and putting our arms around you and being a secure and safe environment. And some need to be C, about stats, success stats, how often you do reviews, what reports you provide clients. So see how suddenly we're doing different marketing campaigns to attract different behavioral styles, not just the one person writing an ad that attracts themselves to that lead generation. And of course, you're going to use it in your leadership. You need to know your own behavioral style. You need to know the behavioral style of all of your team members so that you can communicate in a manner that motivates them and is most valuable, and vice versa. If you're an employee and you want to ask your leader a question, or you have a suggestion, then you need to deliver that suggestion in a manner that is your leader's behavioral style, primary and secondary, not just your own. So there's a few things there that you can utilize to make sure that you not only know behavioral styles, but you're implementing them. Now, I'm going to give you a bit of a way of implementing that. As I said, it's all about implementation. So what I'm doing, I'm just putting in the chat here a bit of a link, and the link is to what we call a sales growth plan. So what I'm going to give you that are on an opportunity to do is to have a sales growth plan with us. So the link is there in the chat, so you can just press on that. And what it is, it's going to take you sort of 90 seconds to complete a bit of information about your business. So some things like where you are currently, what sort of goals that you have, what do you think your two or three main challenges are. So it takes about 90 seconds. And what that does is it may have you eligible for us to do a sales growth plan together. So we spend 45 minutes to an hour, and you walk away with a 90-day game plan. Now, this is valued at over $300. It's more than doubled income in businesses previously. And to add to that, when you are on that sales growth plan, then what I'm also going to give you is the DISC implementation checklist. I'll share that with you. It's going to be yours after your implementation session in your sales growth plan. I'm also going to share with you this electronic version of the report so that you and your team can do the report and you can totally understand your own behavior style and the behavioral style of others. You can use this for your clientele if you're one of those businesses that sees your clients on a regular basis as well. Now, as you can see there, I mentioned before that we have two behavioral styles. We have the behavioral style that we have at work, and then we have our natural behavioral style at home. So if you're going to do behavioral styles, particularly for your team members, then you need to do both. So you're going to need that report. One, you'll get them to do at work, and one you'll get them to do in their safe environment or natural environment. Maybe that's their home. And just as a heads up, it's really important, it's vital that you have a really strong explanation of their mindset and explanation about how they fill that report out so that you get accurate data. So I can run you through that. Just yell out to me if you need a hand and I can explain how to explain it, or we can go through that when you go through your sales growth plan. So make sure you press on that link to the sales growth plan, and I look forward to making time. We can just do it on Zoom if you like. Given it is all about other implementation, there's some other ways that you can keep in contact with us and, of course, get some extra training. Of course, we have our website, Impact Training Corporation, and our Facebook group, our first Facebook page. But more importantly than that, I encourage you to be part of our groups. They're completely free groups, and myself and Steve get in there and do training every week. So if you happen to be in the fitness industry, Sell More Fitness is the group that you should be in for tips, not just on behavioral style, but also on the sales process, which is the seamless sales system. And if you're outside the fitness industry, the Sales Success Club is the Facebook group that you should be part of. Of course, you can also follow me for regular training on my Facebook page, Darren Roberts, speaker and coach, and YouTube. We've got over 100 education videos on business development and communication through Darren Roberts, the Abundance Accelerant. So you can jump on there and check out those YouTube channels and the Facebook pages as well. Now, we do have a question as well. Let me just check that one for you. Gay Brett, good to see you. Thank you for positive feedback. Appreciate that. Get the slides. Yeah, if you want to reach out, if you particularly want the slides, then you've got my number there. I'll just bring it back up. So send me a text and just ask me if there's particular slides you want or what you're looking at getting out of it, and then we can provide those for you from there. So we are right on time. An hour masterclass to help you not only understand behavioral styles, because usually that's a full day, but to implement what you do know. So as I said at the start, knowing without action has the same outcomes as not knowing at all. So what I want you to do, there's a couple of things that were a bit of homework that I suggested to you, didn't I? Is to write down 10 words for each of those behavioral styles that would excite them to make a decision. Then we also had, how would you describe your products and services and ask for a decision to buy using both primary and secondary behaviors for all of those different combinations. And also what I want you to do as you leave here is to have it front of mind. To go out there, and if you're listening to a podcast or you're watching YouTube or you're listening to the radio or you're listening to TV, or if you're at the footy on the weekend, or if you're paying for petrol at the petrol station, I want you to be aware. I want you to listen to people. And I want you to determine speed of speech and tonality. Are they left or right? Let's stay lower quadrant for a little while, because if you don't know, stay low. And what primary and secondary behavioral style do you believe someone is and why? And I want you to have that communication with people. I want you in your businesses, a client may come in or come out, and as they leave, you say, hey, listen, what behavioral style do we think they are and why? Please use the why bit, not just what behavioral style, but why, so that you and your team get in the habit of talking about the characteristics of behavioral styles. It should be part of your team meetings. Make sure you're putting it on your CRM. Make sure you're putting it on the tools in the right-hand side, primary and secondary behavioral styles. Make sure it is front of mind on a regular basis. It takes some focus initially, but then after you've focused on it for a period of time, it becomes somewhat second nature. But this masterclass was all about implementation and using the knowledge you have, not just knowing it and not actually using it. So thank you for everyone for jumping on. Hope that helps. I'm sure it does. It helps in business and in your relationships outside of business. So please make sure you press the link to the sales growth plan. I'd love to give you some extra input to implement and to give you those free tools as well. Otherwise, get out there, make great connections, and use your voice with maximum value so you can help more and more people. Have a great day. Thanks for joining.